Brooks Cascadia 17. A classic gets more classic?
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
can I ask you? Because I had texted you this, Brett, and I was like, how many at least trail shoes are in their 17th version? Do any others come to mind?
I couldn't think of any others that are in the 17th version for trail. I listed off a bunch of road shoes that were beyond 17, but then like the next oldest that I found, the Saucony Peregrine is on the 13, but that's not even close to 17.
Maybe the
Some
Lone
of the
Peak.
Nikes, some of the Nikes are like on 8, 9 for like the Kiger and Wild Horse. The Lone Peak is probably around 8 or 9 as well. The longest standing running shoe model is the Nike Pegasus, and they're on version 40
Wow.
of it. Oh, I think the Asics Kayano is around 30. Okay, so there's road shoes that are older, but there's I just don't. This might be the oldest trail shoe. Um,
Pretty cool.
and yeah, someone's got to have that title, and I guess it kind of makes sense that it's the Brooks Cascadia. It really does feel like it's the trail shoe that's been around the longest. So yeah, we've got the Cascadia 17, pretty full size redesign from the previous Cascadia 16, and um, I would say that they've probably added the most like running elements into the shoe, and we'll dive into whether that actually converted to this being more of a running shoe or not. Before we get going, I just want to say that we did get these shoes from Brooks and Running Warehouse, but we're under no financial obligation to say whether we like the shoe or not, because we want to keep these reviews authentic, beneficial for you. No one's going to get to preview or watch this footage before it gets published to YouTube. Brooks Cascadia 17, $140. My pair is a US size 10, and it came in at 11.9 ounces, 336 grams. So, relatively high on the chonk scale there. Stack height, I actually couldn't quite find exact stack height numbers. I saw 25 4-foot, 33 heel. I saw 28 4-foot, 35 heel. I saw one that said like 12 4-foot, 20 heel. I think either way, it kind of feels like mid 20s in the 4-foot to mid 30s in the heel. It's an 8 millimeter drop, which is actually probably one of the biggest changes that Brooks has ever done with the shoe. It had always been a 10 millimeter drop. I forget if it was this one or the previous model. They switched it down to 8, and I'm sure nobody noticed a difference at all. Materials of the shoe, this upper is a somewhat thicker, denser woven engineered mesh with a pretty generous amount of plastic overlay around the midfoot, forefoot, and a pretty robust toe cap. The tongue is gusseted into the midfoot with a pretty thin stretch mesh. The tongue itself has, I don't know, what do you think? Like kind of like a medium amount of padding?
Yeah, I had it written down here that there were no like over or undersized areas of material in the upper,
No,
including the tongue. I think it was like
which
kind
is
of like
that's very Brooks to be
yes.
very like politically in the middle for everything. That's how this tongue feels. Again, like around the ankle collar, very medium amount of padding. There is a rigid heel cup in the back, pull tab on the back of the heel, as well as a Velcro. Like, do you see this Velcro gator
Attachment points, front and back,
attachment
right?
point? So it's funny. Well, so there's one on the back, but there's no like loop on the front to
Yeah.
attach front. Like they expect you to just put it around the lace, I guess, which I thought was interesting that they actually put the Velcro on the back, but then they didn't have the little metal ring on the front. Maybe,
Yep.
I mean, I've worn gaiters like once in my life, so I don't even really know how they're supposed to be put on. Maybe this is fine. Do you wear gaiters?
I have not once worn gaiters. Like I have no experience here.
Okay, so, well, for the gator people, Brooks has you covered. The midsole is a new midsole to the Brooks Cascadia. It's their DNA Loft V2, which is it's an EVA foam. It's pretty standard, but Brooks says that this is softer and lighter than the previous DNA Loft foam. That is probably true. Is it soft and light? I think that's up for debate. There's a new-ish, I don't know, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's not. We'll dive into it. Uh, Rock plate in the shoe, it's segmented, so it's actually in a couple different pieces, and it kind of goes along the middle of the shoe, and it's called Trail Adapt, and it's a protective rock plate. It's also supposed to add stability to the shoe, and looking at the shoe, it really appears that this midsole is split into two pieces running from toe to heel, and they put the rock plate in the middle and glue the two pieces together because there's like a very obvious glue line that when you press on it, it's
Yep.
kind of firm. Yeah, I would be curious to like talk to the Brooks design team and see as to like why they ultimately went for placing this rock plate like in the middle of the foam and having to glue the whole thing back together, as opposed to just the traditional putting the rock plate right, on the underside of the outsole like they had done in the previous 16 versions of the Cascadia. The outsole is Brooks's own Trail Tack green rubber. It's a pretty hard compound. It's made of 25% recycled content. It feels pretty I'm trying to think. It almost feels like similar density to like Vibram's Mega Grip. I can't speak too much on like its actual grip properties. It was plenty sufficient for where I was running. One thing I will say though is that it's a pretty significant outsole redesign over like most previous Cascadias. I would say this Cascadia probably has the smallest and sharpest lugs of any Cascadia, which may be better, may be worse, depending on your circumstance and what you're looking for. But that's something that was different. Finn, what kind of running did you get in this shoe?
I know that on this show, the high water mark is 100 miles. I did not quite get 100 on this. I did 79 miles on, I believe, 14 runs. How about you?
But you're training for a road marathon, so to be still
I
getting
am.
in that kind of trail miles, we appreciate it. A salute to you for that.
Oh, thank you.
I was wrong with my math when I was texting you this morning, and my run today actually ticked it over to 101 miles.
That's awesome.
So got it. I got 101 in on the Cascadia, all in Ashland, Oregon. Got in a lot of kind of cruiser buffed out single track. I got a lot of kind of still like late summer, early fall, dry hard pack conditions. I did get to take the shoes out on a couple wet, sloppy days, but for the most part, non-technical, buffed out cruiser trails. So very much a lot of running that you don't really have to think about. Did get in some hiking because these trails here are still fairly steep. My longest run was about 3 hours in the shoe. What did you think of the overall fit of this one?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say here. For me, generous toe box, true to size fit. As we were talking about earlier, no like rough or stiff feeling like under or oversized areas in the upper. You said maybe it's a rigid heel counter, maybe a bit too rigid for me. But like I didn't experience any hot spots or pressure points. Felt like there was just enough padding in the tongue area. And yeah, I think like I'm sure we'll get into like what this shoe was. Well, we will get into what this shoe was designed for later in the episode. But I think generally for me with the upper, I was just very impressed with the fit and the overall durability after 80 miles because I think, yeah, like for what this shoe is designed for, I think the upper is really important and it definitely like bared that out over 80 miles.
Yeah, I agree with all that. It's definitely a very medium fitting upper. Like, it's not a big square toe box, but at the same time, the whole platform's pretty wide. Not so much volume that it feels like you're wearing a trash bag on your foot, but definitely enough room to still wiggle your toes around. It feels like Brooks definitely erred on the side of durability over, lightweight or breathability. That was one thing I noticed is like this upper runs a little bit warm, but I think it kind of has to run a little bit warm to be this durable. I mean, after 100 miles in the shoe, there's like zero signs of wear. There's just a little bit of dirt. I feel pretty confident that over the course of running in this shoe, the upper would never be the fail point, and I think that's something that Brooks has definitely worked on a lot, as this is a very popular shoe in the through hiking community. And I know that you can attest to that. One thing that I thought was just kind of interesting about the fit, and I guess that's probably pretty classic to the Brooks Cascadia as well, is it's a very flat shoe. There's virtually no rocker. It's very classic shoe shaped. And I imagine this is something that Brooks is probably not going to mess with too much. And that even translates up into the arch as well. You know, like some shoes just naturally have a little bit more arch feel than others. This one has a very kind of like lower arch type feel, which, you know, is nice because the arch doesn't get in the way at all. For those higher arched runners, though, you might feel like you're desiring a little bit more arch underneath. This
Yep.
shoe will also be really nice for those who wear orthotics. You know, if you just take the insole out, you actually have a pretty flat spot to place an orthotic in. I know there are still some people out there who have custom orthotics, wear super feet, Curex, etc. It's getting harder and harder to fit those insoles in shoes. And this is one of those shoes that will still pretty classically fit an aftermarket insole pretty well. What did you think of the whole ride in terms of, you know, the cushion and the feel underfoot? Where did you find that the shoe worked best?
Yeah, and I think this is probably par for the course or as expected with the Cascadia. Certainly no like bouncy or springy feeling, not particularly responsive or like I guess you'd call it like top end performance oriented. This will never be like when you step into it like a go fast feeling shoe. I think
It's
as
not a
we've been
race
saying,
car.
it's not a race car. There is more cushion stack in this version as you described in the specs, which we can debate. Like I think that there's more here for what it's made for, which is like those ultra efforts, the all day outings. You know, the intent is for it to be like a day-to-day all terrain training or long distance hiking type shoe. But whether or not like it certainly doesn't create like there's also not like a plush feeling there either. So like
No.
that's interesting to me. Like this with this DNA loft material, it's well cushioned, but it's not plush. I think they went more towards the firm side, and just based on like what I was reading in their own marketing and tech reports, it seemed like they were trying to create performance stability in all terrains, especially technical terrain.
Yeah. And it's definitely very stable as a result of, you know, this new Trail Adapt plate, probably the increased amount of glue that's in the midsole, this foam that they say is softer than their old one, but still isn't mushy by any means. Like I actually found this shoe to be very firm. And, you know, reading the marketing of them saying Loft V2 is softer and lighter, I can't imagine running in the previous Cascadia models. I must have felt like pure plywood. But it does also make sense though, because I could totally see myself walking all day in this shoe and then maybe walking all day the day after that and the day after that and experiencing a shoe with very minimal change. So perhaps there's definitely something that Brooks is going, assuming that some people are going to not be running a single step in this shoe, but instead taking it through pretty solid amount of mileage in the through hiking world. You know, I definitely found the shoe to feel very stable, firm, not very explosive. And as a result, like I actually noticed on my Strava on some of my runs, like a perceived easy, like, you know, a 2 out of 10 run in this shoe versus
Oh
just
wow.
a more fun feeling shoe. My paces were slower in this shoe. And that's, I think, simply because it's firm. I have to run a little bit daintier. And then if I run any faster, it kind of feels like it's really beating up my body. So this is a shoe that if I'm running for pace, I'm not wearing this shoe. But if it's just effort based and I'm going for a long time and the effort is easy, that's where I thought the shoe like really shined.
That's kind of cool that this shoe on its own can lock you into a sustainable rate of perceived exertion.
I guess, but like if it was a race, I wouldn't want to wear the shoe because that, you know,
Depends on the race though, right?
well, I can lock into an easy effort in a Nike Wild Horse, but like I'm literally a handful of seconds a mile faster in the Wild Horse than the Cascadia simply because I think the foam technologies are a little bit more beneficial to increased, not running economy, but like energy return. So, you know, I think that kind of leads into like racing in this shoe. This is not a shoe I would race in because I just don't find that it helped me be the fastest version of myself, short or long. For training, I don't care because I run by time. I don't run by miles, and time is time. And if this shoe helps keep me healthy, then that's a great shoe. But if I'm racing anything of any distance, I want a shoe that's going to help me be a little bit faster. And for me, this was not that shoe. What about you? Would you race in this shoe?
Yeah, so totally agree. I would not race in this shoe at distances of 100 miles and below. Might start to consider this shoe in a 200-mile racing format. Definitely would consider it in like a long trail FKT type format. I think what you said there about the shoe keeping you healthy, I think
Yeah.
that is a hugely important piece of criteria for those types of arenas. In that case, performance maybe matters less, and sort of like just keeping your foot healthy is of utmost critical importance. So I think it's very like nichely contextual, but there are like like on one hand a few areas where I would race it.
So here's a question for you then. With the new foam technologies, and we'll point towards the Speedland GS TAM because it has a P-backs carrier, P-backs insole. You did the 100-mile wilderness in it. We saw
Yeah,
a good amount of them out at the Cocodona 250. Historically, a shoe that's soft just can't maintain its structural integrity for something like 200 plus miles or even a long trail attempt, etc. That's why this shoe has always existed, because it's firm. It's not going to change over the 200 miles. Now that we have like plastic-based foams, like in the GS TAM, that seemingly have as good or maybe even better durability, but are now just a little bit softer and rebound more energy. Would you go for something like that on a 200-mile or say like a Cocodona type course over this, or would you go for that firmer rigid? And then same question for, I don't know, we'll
yeah.
say like the PCT or the AT.
Okay, so if it's the Cocodona course or the PCT, where with few exceptions, most of it is like graded for equestrian type activities, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
with the Speedland. But I
Okay.
actually was able to use this Cascadia and the Speedland in comparable technical settings, and at a hiking pace, I'm picking the Cascadia
Okay. So you'd go for a little bit firmer, which
for
I
sure.
did feel like this shoe is very protective,
Very much so.
to the point where like I could totally see myself walking all day with a pack in this shoe.
Yep.
How did you feel about the durability?
Durability was great. I mean, going back to the upper, I think in a through hiking setting, especially when you're doing, thousands of miles in one go, replacing your shoes becomes an incredibly expensive endeavor. And like, if you can get, like, there are a lot of people that try to get into that like Goldilocks zone of 3 or 4 shoes per through hike. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people pick the shoe based on the upper. Um, this review is particularly nostalgic for me because I did wear 3 pairs of the Cascadia 8 back in 2014 to do my AT through hike. And I think one thing that has stayed the same across the versions is their commitment to this pretty like durable, intact upper. So I think it's super important.
Yeah, it's funny because you just sent me some pictures of your Cascadia 8s from when you did the AT, and it's a little bit wild that that upper does not look that different from
No,
this one 9 generations of Cascadias later. I will say though, this one does look a little bit more durable. Like they extended the plastic overlay a little bit further and they got rid of that crease point that gets created right around the midfoot that has plagued so many Cascadia versions, because yours had a big blowout on the inside of the midfoot.
yeah.
Um, this looks like it might hold up a little bit better, which is good because it's 9 versions later.
Interestingly enough, and I would be curious if anybody in the audience has done a recent through hike in a Cascadia, I wore 3 pairs of the 8 on the AT, and like clockwork, each version, I experienced those sidewall blowouts at right around mile 700. So that upper, it lasted basically 700 miles, which is what Speedland is touting with its GSTM, etc.
Yeah. One thing that I worry about with the durability from a through hiking standpoint, I don't think it's much of a big deal with from a running standpoint because you're going to run the miles much quicker, is this outsole having probably better grip, but a little bit less
Yeah.
surface area. I wonder if people through hiking are going to actually get to the point where they're significantly wearing down the lugs too much over the course of a long a long hike, because 100 miles in, I am seeing some wear on the lugs because there's just really not that much surface area touching the ground. It's a totally acceptable amount of wear for running. I know that there's still easily 500, 600 miles worth of tread here on this outsole, and I would probably pack out this midsole before I even get through the outsole. But I wonder if, from a through hiking standpoint, this outsole got a little bit worse, as Brooks might have made the shoe a little bit better for running.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I'm curious about that too.
Because I mean, it does still seem it's still a very hard rubber. I imagine you're probably still getting a decent amount of miles out of it, but perhaps not as many as before.
What were your with the outsole? What were your experiences in terms of like sticking power on terrain, maybe on technical terrain, compared to like because we've now reviewed a lot of shoes with the Mega Grip underfoot. We've done the VJ shoe. How did this compare for you?
I didn't really get to run on much terrain that even necessitated grippy rubber. Most of like the decomposed granite in Ashland, when it gets wet, it gets a little bit tacky. And if my foot ever does give way, it's not because the rubber compound was bad. It's because the outsole pattern was bad. Similar way to like how a mountain bike tire works, at least in Ashland, where like I'm not sliding out because I went across a slick rock. I'm sliding out because the tread lugs didn't give good bite in the dirt. And so that's kind of the way that I have to review these shoe uppers. This outsole pattern is great for that. So in like a little bit of mud or, slightly softer dirt conditions, this outsole did a great job of biting into the ground. Whether it actually is going to hold up on like ice or slick rock or wood, that's to be determined. I've never had any problems with Brooks outsoles before. They're designed in Seattle. It says so on the bottom. It's got to be decent. The shoe's $140. That's now on like the cheaper end of the trail running shoe spectrum. How do you feel about the value and what you get for $140 here?
When I saw the $140 price tag, it in a different way, it brought me back to the era of like $2 per gallon gas. I was just like, wow, like that you can still find that out there. Like, where am I? North Dakota? It's just like this is wild.
Yeah,
I love
I
it.
guess so. I kind of it's like kind of a parallel question to the value. $140. $140 for a shoe that's seemingly going to last a very long time. Great. It's pretty firm shoe. It's not very exciting. It's pretty reliable. Does this shoe, even though it's a great value, does it have room in your like daily training quiver?
I think it does, and maybe this is outing me because I like privately I've been thinking a lot about 200-mile races and doing more stuff on these long distance trails. So like the entire time that I was testing this Brooks Cascadia, I was sort of like fantasizing about doing the AT and doing things like Cocodona and Bigfoot and the Tahoe 200 and stuff like that. So I think it would. And like as I'm thinking about like what shoes I would want to wear on those long distance trails, like I could buy one pair of the Speedlands, or I could buy two Cascadias for the exact same price. Um,
It's true.
so there's just interesting trade offs like that. But
Yeah.
this is a heavy duty shoe. Like I think if there's one like other description I had to give to it, it's the heaviest duty shoe in the Brooks lineup. You can cross over between hiking, roads, trails. Highly versatile. It's going to give you like minimum viable performance in each category. I forgot to mention it with the outsole, but like this is not a bad road commuting shoe either. So for me, 140, especially if you're like a new entrant to trail or you're doing some of these more exotic things in the space, it's a really interesting consideration.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to break down the value of the shoe. This is my pitch for why everybody needs a Brooks Cascadia. And after everything I've said about the shoe, it really makes it sound like I would not own a Cascadia. But this is why I think everyone needs to own a Cascadia. Wearing this shoe even once per week kept all my other shoes feeling amazing.
Oh man.
And I don't care if someone would perceive that as a knock on this shoe, but when you wear Hokas every day, they don't feel like Hokas. Just like, in The Incredibles, I feel the dude at the end, he's like, when everyone's super, nobody is. That's the problem. If you wear super shoes or really high cushion shoes every day, they're not super anymore. This shoe keeps me grounded. This shoe keeps all my other shoes feeling fun. That is why I think everyone needs a Cascadia in their lineup to keep their other shoes fun.
We're dead. We're dead. We're dead. We survived, but we're dead.
Question I have for the viewers is this even by like today's standards, is this even a running shoe anymore, or is this just a light hiker that some people run in? I feel like that's my debate question for the episode, and I want to hear people's thoughts on it. And if you did find the shoe review helpful and you want to try these shoes out and your local run specialty shop doesn't have them, feel free to use our link below to purchase the Brooks Cascadia 17 from our friends at Running Warehouse. Your purchase helps support the channel, allows us to keep creating shoe reviews like this. And next up is a shoe that we left up to the viewers' vote. I had on across YouTube and Instagram. We had 3 different shoes to see what we were going to run in next. And much to our kind of surprise, the next shoe that we are going to review is the Craft Nord Light Ultra.